patients tend to feel better and have improved health. Essentially, Cruz is saying that sunlight combined with water in our cells plays a major role in keeping us healthy beyond just the usual ATP energy system.
How did I learn all that? I learned it from the story of photosynthesis. Why? Because of chlorophyll and hemoglobin. They look exactly the same. And you said that you listened to the Huberman podcast, and I know there was a lot of science in there, but you might remember that I told you the two most important biologic semiconductors before the KT event were hemoglobin and chlorophyll. Why?
Right.
Because they have a nitride cage around it. Well, remember, what's the most dominant gas in the atmosphere? Turns out it's nitrogen.
Dr. Cruz is explaining how energy worked in living things before there was oxygen. Back then, two important proteins acted like semiconductors, which means they could help generate electrons needed for energy. He thought about how things changed after the KT event, a big disaster that wiped out many life forms, and realized there was more to the story. He understood that these semiconductor proteins were giving off light to water in the body, as Dr. Robert Beckett had found. This made the water behave like a kind of quantum battery, which means the water could store and use energy in a special, efficient way. Many nutrition studies, including those that doctors and researchers rely on, do not account for these effects of light. These studies assume they are showing how nutrition truly works in the body, but they overlook the impact of light entirely. Since light is an important factor for health, ignoring it means these studies are missing a crucial part of the picture when it comes to understanding how nutrition really affects us.
Our mitochondria makes a special kind of water. It's called deuterium depleted water. You don't get any deuterium depleted water coming out of your tap at home. So what happens if you ran all the experiments with that type of water? And it turns out that water has a high dielectric constant. What does that mean in English? It means it makes more electrons. What's the story of life? The more electrons you have, the better you do. What do electrons do? More electrons you have, the more light you could absorb.
When enough light enters the system, the brain can function better. When asked why he uses methylene blue, Dr. Cruz explains that it's because methylene blue helps provide more electrons. More electrons combined with shining light on the brain leads to improved brain function, which ultimately makes him a better surgeon. Dr. Cruz also mentions the bright blue lights used during surgery, like the xenon light. He suggests that surgeons use a spectroscope to analyze the lights used in the operating room, like those on microscopes, headgear, or overhead lights. By doing this, they can see the light spectrum and understand how it might affect patient outcomes, as he believes the type of light used during surgery has a significant effect on recovery.
I remember I specifically changed where I did surgery into a hospital that didn't have the best equipment in the world. But you know what they had? They had a courtyard that I could bring my patients outside in the sun. And the anesthesiologist didn't with me, and fight with me about doing this. And they were stunned. They were like, I can't believe this guy's patients just wake up and they do great when they shouldn't. Like the other doctors who operated on people with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, they would be in the ICU for 2 or 3 days because they had sundowning and everything else. And I would do my subdurals and bring the patient outside, and they're like, this fucking guy's going home the next day. That is how powerful sunlight is for our biology.
Did you know that our bodies create light internally? Creating light inside the body is crucial for survival, especially in environments with less sunlight, like places far north, high latitudes. A biophysicist named Fritz Popp conducted important research in the 1960s and 70s. Around the same time, another researcher, Dr. Robert Becker, discovered that bones have properties similar to semiconductors, especially materials that can manage electrical flow. He showed that bones are made of collagen and apatite, which act like P-type and N-type semiconductors. These two components manage electrical currents and suggested that a photoelectric effect, a process where light causes electrical changes, was happening in bones. Since Becker wasn't a physicist, he brought in a specialist, possibly named Charlie Bowman, to help figure it out. This work demonstrated that light and electricity were involved even in bones, indicating that our bodies can generate light as part of how they function.
When we check for the photoelectric effect both ways, with collagen and with apatite, it glows brown-red. And when you do it the other way, it glows blue. Then that means that we should have a light signature. Like, for example, anytime a doctor is listening to your podcast, they're going to say, well, when I cut somebody open, I don't see any light. Well, you're not. You won't see it because it's ultra weak biophotons.
Fritz Popp used special equipment to prove that living things, including humans, create light. To see this light, which is very faint, you need special equipment called a photomultiplier. In the 1960s, Fritz Popp created photomultipliers, machines that could detect this tiny light. He then tested all kinds of living things, including leaves and other organisms, by placing them in the photomultiplier to see if they emitted light.
I spent almost $100,000 translating Russian journals about scientists that were doing this work both in Japan and Russia, and found out that mitochondrial DNA actually creates light through the process of breaking electrons and protons down from food. And I kept reading it, and the number one thing that I remember from the papers, still to this day, that you had to have oxygen and you had to have electron chain transport working for this to happen.
Melanin, the pigment in our skin, is produced by a gene called POMC, which is activated by UV light. Fritz Popp discovered that every living cell emits very weak UV light called biophotons. This suggests that UV light is naturally produced by our bodies and is likely used for internal signaling. This challenges the idea that UV light is purely toxic. Instead, it might be crucial for important biological processes that we don't fully understand just yet.
Dermatologists and ophthalmologists are assholes because biology is making UV light. That means it's not toxic. That means it's being used for optical photonic signaling that we don't know about. We're creating light and we absorb light, and we have all these proteins in us that are chromophore proteins. I said, God or evolution wouldn't have done this if it wasn't important. You know, I started finding UVA detectors on our cornea and our skin. I never learned that in medical school. When I saw that, I'm like, there's a story here that hasn't been told.
Dr. Cruz criticizes the medical implant industry, which promotes using screws, rods, and other metal parts to fix broken bones. The argument is that implants interfere with the natural healing process of bones because they mess up the bone's photoelectric ability, the way bones naturally use electrical currents and light to heal. According to this, metal implants destroy the natural process. Bones are special because, unlike most body tissues, they regenerate completely without scarring. For example, if you break your arm and it heals, there's no mark inside showing where it was broken. It's as if it never happened, which is different from most other body parts. The liver is one other organ that can regrow, but this kind of complete regeneration is rare in mammals. Dr. Robert Becker did research in the 1960s to understand how bones heal. He found that our body creates a small direct current, DC, that stimulates red blood cells in the bone marrow to de-differentiate, meaning they turn into bone cells, which is how fractures heal completely without a scar. Becker also discovered that the main parts of bone, collagen and apatite, are semiconductors, meaning they can conduct electrical currents. He even found that bones can emit light, much like an LED, showing that bones use both electricity and light for healing. Another interesting thing is the testosterone problem in young men. Many people today, especially young men in their 20s and 30s, are focused on boosting testosterone levels, often through injections, seeing it as a fountain of youth for energy and vitality. This trend is growing rapidly, but there's an underlying issue behind it that isn't being addressed. Here's what Dr. Jack Cruz has to say about it.
They all have Pregnenolone-Steele syndrome from their screens. This is the basis of MK Ultra's work. It's what happens. Oh yes, my friend. It destroys your sex steroid hormones by design. And you know how we can make a prediction that somebody is...
What destroys your sex?
The blue light.
The blue light, right. Yeah.
Blue light screens, non-native EMF, RF, microwaves, take it all away.
But what do you make about the sort of obsession right now with young people and this testosterone therapy?
You're not listening to me. They're obsessed with tech, therefore that's why they're obsessed with that.
Okay, I see.
Fix the tech addiction, then you fix that problem.
That's it for today's video. Be sure to check out Danny Jones's channel. His podcasts are truly fascinating, and if you enjoyed this, subscribe and give us a like.